Today we are excited to join VictorRiddel on a journey through aesthetics and creating detailed experiences. We'll be starting in Wake the Robot.
Okay, so Wake the Robot. This was actually quite early in my Horizon career. I think this was the third world that I built. And I was just starting to get to grips with scripting, so I wanted to build a very simple game experience. But at the same time, I wanted to make something that would work really well with first-time users to Horizon and possibly even first-time VR users. So I knew it needed to be simple, it needed to be gentle, it needed to explore some, simple mechanics like a little bit of jumping, interacting with objects, and it needed to be easy and not necessarily, explained. So not lots of text. I learned in my previous world that having lots of text in your start area, users just ignore that stuff and they don't like to read. So this also uses a technique we sometimes call in game dev as kind of attractors or points of interest. So where you started, the only interesting thing in that cave was the kind of the light at the edge of the room. So you're drawn to that. Then you come out here, there's a little firefly, and this firefly kind of moves away. And this was meant to draw your attention forward so you'd miss anything behind you. Now, if you look behind you, there are little clues here, but more about that later. So then you would reach this point here, and the next most interesting thing here was this composition. And this is where the kind of the reveal happens. So this is the kind of the wow moment in the piece. And hopefully they would round the corner, and then that's where literally 80%, 90% of the capacity was all thrown into this view here. So that means that the area that you just traveled down was really light on capacity. There's not much detail. I couldn't really spend too much there. So then you're drawn ideally up to this point here. And that's where you make your discovery. And this is the only instruction in the entire world which tells you that you need to find some power cubes. So hopefully the user is now at a point where they want to investigate the space. There's actually a clue here where there's a little arrow that sends you this way. And that was, again, just some simple actions in Horizon to get people used to jumping. Also, if they look around, hopefully they should see, the blue lighting that highlights one of the power cubes, which is above the tree. So people could quite easily obtain one of the cubes. And then, again, simple interactions, just playing around. So what I realized is with some very simple scripting, if I could just get the user to find 3 of these cubes, assemble them, if they got lucky, they might open the final door. And it's a super simple puzzle, this one. Then I could have something interesting and compelling. Artistically, I'll talk about this view a little bit more. So what I wanted to do was really throw attention on the robot himself. So he's lit in a way that looks interesting to the user, and he's also staged in a way so he's slightly higher up and looks a little bit more dramatic. And then we've got the backdrop of the moon and the stars and the trees, but all the time it feeling like a very kind of gentle, easy experience. So then what I hope the user would do is move back to here, and then when they reach this point here, they would have a direct line of sight to this orange area here, and that's used again. It's high contrast, it's more interesting. The light is positioned on the wall there to draw attention, and that's where you find another cube. And then the last cube was behind the waterfall using a classic kind of Zelda technique, if you like. There's always something behind there, so that's where you'll find the last cube, and then they'll play around with that. So that was really the intention with this, is gentle, simple, easy, delightful. So everything for the aesthetic and the art style feeds into that idea. Yeah. So, but when I talk about aesthetic is more than just lighting and the art that you're creating in the world. It's everything that feeds into that. So the style of the writing, if you're writing things on walls, the music, the style of the VFX, everything, sound effects. So everything creates that kind of consistent aesthetic that makes this feel kind of peaceful and calming. Okay, probably a good time to jump into Crashsite. So if you join me there, I'll talk about my thinking that went into that world. After the completion of Wake the Robot, I wanted to explore Horizon as a tool for creating narrative experiences. So one thing that's really interesting about single-player VR is you can really immerse a single person in a narrative. But the minimum number of people you can have the minimum number of people in a Horizon world is 4. So I had to do some hacks to detect when someone had entered the world and then send the next person to a room that notified them that they couldn't play the world until they started a new session. The reasoning there is when I'm triggering plot points or spatial sound effects that I want to draw the attention of a user, it's really hard to do that successfully with more than one person. I think it could work with 2, but when you get a group of 4 in a narrative, a linear narrative experience, it's very hard for me to guarantee the experience that person is going to have. So that was just one point on Crashsite. Secondly, taking what I'd learned in scripting from Wake the Robot and kind of taking it up a level, I'd got comfortable because I was, complete beginner to scripting. I got comfortable with the idea that I could send the player through, an experience and then have them search for something, and then just simply taking that object to another point in the world and then activating a trigger. I would have the basics of, a narrative experience. So, with Crashsite, I wanted to obviously tell a story in 4 parts. So the first thing I needed to do was actually write that story. So, I would recommend if any of you are kind of want to attempt something like this, you really don't have to get too detailed about, the story that you're trying to tell. Just have a good sense of the major and minor plot points for each part of the story. So that was the first thing I did. I just got pen to paper, said, okay, I want to create an experience where you get to know some characters, and my ultimate goal with that is that you actually care about those characters before the end of part 2. So I wrote part 1, I wrote part 2, and I just put down notes for part 3 and part 4. I had a very good understanding of how the story was going to end, and it was only when I was confident that the ending was compelling, I thought, okay, I've got something, I'm going to start on part 1. So for part 1, it was really just about the introduction of the characters. Now, in Horizon, because I can trigger voice files, and I can record into those files, I can create characters. But what I needed was places where the player or the user would go to where I could stage those moments of narrative. So the first one is the cockpit. So this is the kind of the most detailed part of this world. It's staged very deliberately like this. So because it's quite a small play area, as we say, I've got a good understanding of where the user's going to be, so I can compose the scene. So here, I've got the desk, and then kind of I know that I can put planets over down below there, and the crashed spaceship, which is really the first kind of intriguing part of the experience. It's like, oh my god, what's happened there? And that's obviously part of the story. That's where part 2 takes place. So, different techniques. So I can use text to communicate story and develop a character. I can use a voice in your head through a radio message. I can have a computer, make some noise. And if you've played Crashsite, then you'll know a B2 and in part 2 Scanley, and they're actual characters, and they're either static or they move around. So that was really it. It was the other consideration was I needed to gate the player, so I didn't want them to come in and see everything. Now, this is a special version of Crashsite where all the doors are open, so I wanted to deliver, the major and minor plot points in a space and then unlock the next one. So that's how it's structured. So this is an introduction. Who are you? You're on a spaceship, you're in cryo storage, and you're woken up. So I know who am I, and that's explained right off. Who are the characters? There's a navigation computer, that's one of the characters, and we'll meet B2 later on. Once I've kind of understood that, then I'll kind of move on into the next room. Okay, so there was a couple of technical things that I wanted to do. One was explore the idea of turning lights on and off in Horizon, because very early on, this is over a year old, this world. There wasn't any dynamic lighting then. So what I had to do, I had to build this entire room. Yeah. And again, we've got stations. There's some storytelling that happens here. There's some storytelling that happens here. So this room kind of, it just serves those two activities. So I had to build this room, and then I had to build another version of this room, which is currently, 10 meters in this direction. So if I remove the flux canister, that darkened version of this room then moves into position and covers absolutely everything in this room, apart from B2 and the desk. So if I place this back in, then it's moved 10 meters in this direction. So this creates the illusion of turning lights on and off. Again, we have we progress the narrative in this area, but the next thing I needed to do, because I'd spent so many hours creating the illusion of turning lights on and off, I wanted the user to have to turn the lights off again. So that's when you have a conversation on the computer, you get an item from this locked cabinet, but then you have to take this back into the room. And that puzzle actually, it appeared part way through just from me kind of moving around and thinking, I need that event to happen again because it's interesting. Then the next thing I wanted to do artistically was use imagery. And because Horizon doesn't support imagery, I had the idea of actually putting it on a door. But then I had the problem, which actually turned into an advantage, of I had this button here. So what I had to do was create a screen below it to kind of complete the illusion. So I'm gonna teleport in this teleport to the spaceship that I've seen. But there's a little radar here, and that was just another element, because without that, then seeing this raycast to that button would have been quite strange. So that was, again, it was really nice. It was just looking at the problem and then thinking, okay, how do I turn that into something nice or a little bit of an advantage? So that's when that happened. I was very happy with how Crashsite Part 1 turned out. It was a 6-week project. It was pretty intensive. I had some great help from scripter Daniel, who was amazing and really helped me understand the logic of laying out a script or voice files. The voice files in this were actually recorded through the microphone on the Quest, because it was before I discovered the virtual line-in PC hack for getting audio into Horizon. But what I had to do was I had to record my voice for the navigation computer or the little robot B2, and then do some filtering, and then I had my chin really close to the desk with the speakers on my desk in my PC room, and then just blasting into the headset to get the sound files that you hear. And in part 2, there's one point you can even hear me click the mouse button really loudly in one of the voice files. So essentially, that was Crashsite, and apologies to any fans of Crashsite for part 3. You know, I know it says in the messaging when you get there, coming soon, but I assure you, when I get a better handle on character animation, then part 3 will definitely happen. Okay, so I think the next one I'd like to talk about will be Cloud Beach. So I wanted to create a world that felt like when you looked out on the horizon, it wasn't 500 meters, it wasn't a kilometer, it was tens of kilometers. So what I needed for that to be convincing, I was going to need to investigate some false perspective techniques. There were some other techniques I wanted to try. One I'll call kind of subconscious detailing, more about that in a bit, and another one, atmospheric perspective. So because I wanted it to be convincing, I knew I needed cloud, so I actually started with that. So I built a 1 kilometer flattened cylinder. I put myself in the center, you know, look out to the edges, move your head around, make sure the far camera clipping plane wasn't, you know, culling objects, as we say. And then I had the kind of the basis for where I could construct the skybox, or sky dome, as we sometimes call it. So initially I did some experiments with unlit geometry. So, you know, just getting, you know, flattened cylinders and interesting shapes, applying an unlit texture to them. The problem with that is when I got them to 500 meters, they started being affected by the fog layer, and the fog layer was really important to me because that's how I was going to enforce a sense of depth. So I also tried this with text. Now text is emissive or unlit, as we say. So, you know, it'll always glow. It won't be affected by lighting and shadows. Using the text, I was then convinced that I could kind of maintain the visual quality of the objects at 500 meters. So when I had a sky that I was convinced by, then I started to play around with the propping. So these are the islands. So what I was trying to achieve there is, can I make people believe that these things are of scale, you know, and you're seeing how they should look, like, you know, 10, 20, 30 kilometers away. So when I'm looking in this direction, you can see that the structure in the middle, the islands with the rock column with the settlement on top, it looks lighter than the one on the right, which looks lighter than the one on the left. And this is what I call atmospheric perspective. So when things are super far away, they get lighter because there's more, you know, there's more atmosphere and particles, whatever, between my eye and it. But Horizon gives us this ability as well. So using a micro bit of fog, you know, getting that fog slider in your environment gizmo and making that panel really huge, and then just trying, you know, what 0.1 looks like, 0.2, 0.3, until I get to a point where the fog is doing this, right? So that's one technique for making you believe that the one in the center is further away. The other technique I used, the kind of imposed detail, that's just a trick we often use where things get less detailed as they get further away. You know, we do this in games development, but it works really well if there are common elements in the different, you know, props at different distances. So the settlement, you know, that's probably about 30 objects, the one at the top with the propeller moving. But then when we get to the one on the right, that propeller is like half the amount of objects. But because you see the settlement and this detail in the nearest one, you just impose that on the next thing. So by the time we get to the ones really far out, this is like 15 objects or whatever. But because in the mind of the viewer, I've established the detail, when you see these other things, you believe that they're at the same detail. So therefore you think there's more detail in the scene than there actually is, because it's really not very much. But these settlements, the near ones, they're all doing the job of making you kind of understand, the structures and the construction of those things. There was actually, in an earlier version, there was one of these settlement buildings actually in the water where we're standing, with a small island, and it was super high detailed. So, I would look at that and think, oh my God, I look at the detail on this door, and then I would see a door or a window on the higher ones, and my brain would think, oh, there must be the same amount of detail in there. So Cloud Beach, once I kind of satisfied that goal of, I can make people believe that, they're looking, tens of kilometers. Then I thought, okay, so what is the function of the world? So initially I'm thinking, okay, so it's a place for people to come and just have a little fun day at the beach, maybe have a picnic. And then, as I'm sure this happens with many Horizon builders, you're thinking, oh, it'd be great to have a meditation spot in there, and we could have a dance club, and all of these things started to happen. And I was thinking, no. So because throughout my, again, time in Horizon, I was starting to understand, capacity and capacity planning, and really kind of having a good sense of where you want to spend your capacity budget. I knew that I was going to need to break this world into multiple versions, to do the dance club version or the meditation version, and they became the other beaches as well. So if we go back to the island, I'll just talk a little bit about the activities. You might have noticed the shark. The shark was actually from someone's feedback, because I had to contain the user in a space. There's I'll call it a shark net now. It was just a net originally, because if I can get the cloud that you can see up here, if I can get more than 500 meters of that, then it will start to glitch out. So I had to contain the user within a space. But quite rightly, people got frustrated when they got to here because they wanted to go to the beach. So I put a shark circling the beach there, and then people didn't want to go there anymore, and then they stopped talking about it. Anyway, okay, so as many of you know, we have the great throwing samples. If you build a new world, you'll get some really great things like basketballs and frisbees and stuff like that. So I thought, this is very appropriate to the beach. Also, Elastic Plastic. Greg, many of you know him. Created the little floating ball, which again is just really wonderful and playful. I think he just hits it with a force every now and again. The paper aeroplane, again, I thought it was a kind of a nice thing to use in this world. And then I just started making a list of, okay, it'd be nice to fly a kite, and it'd be nice to go fishing, and it'd be nice to, maybe do a treasure hunt. And they became the other activities. The one that I'm yet to implement is the cooking activity, which is going to happen here. But you're going to need to collect the food, and there are 3 items of food when this is in and working that you'll need to collect. There's coconuts on a coconut tree over here. You'll also be able to go fishing, and that's actually quite close to being implemented, and it's kind of fun. The fishing activity to get the fish to cook, and then the making food interactive as well. The kite seemed to be a nice, playful kind of beach activity. Now this was originally based off the Scanley script. So in Crashsite Part 2, you meet Scanley and he just follows you around. So I adapted that script, but then it needed a little bit more math, a little bit more expertise. So again, this was Elastic Plastic who helped out on this one. There's the fishing, more on that soon. Slingshot mechanics, so there's a slingshot, so you could fire at the tree and you knock down some coconuts. So you'll go fishing, get some coconuts, and then you'll get another item of food. I'm not quite sure what that is, and then you'll be able to make food for people. So it'll deliver on its kind of original idea of this being a place for friends to go and hang out at the beach and have a little picnic and kind of role play around that idea. Aesthetically, this needed to be bright and fun and, really deliver on that day at the beach idea. The way that the sun it kind of lights the sea. This was just something I discovered in a previous world where if you put metal or an extreme plastic material on one of your objects, it will always have a kind of a light spot at a certain angle. The sea plane actually dictated the position of the sun above it, and I use the same technique in the dance version and the relaxed, the meditation version, because it's there. So that was a really nice discovery of finding this kind of lighting highlight in the material on that. So to talk about the aesthetic, it needs to feel sunny and beachy. So I know that I needed some like lovely kind of beach music. So I reached out to composer Roa, who creates copyright-free music, and asked if it was okay to use the music in the world, and they confirmed. So we don't have the music on now, but that's just helps with the overall aesthetic, because you've got that lovely playful kind of beach music, and also the plant life. So it was really important to me that this didn't feel just like an island. It was kind of a little devoid of life. So I did a lot of experiments with using text to represent flowers. This is, it's relatively efficient technique, building up layers of text objects, but using multiple text characters on here. So, this is only about 4 or 5 objects, rather than it being, if you had to do this with geometry, you'd be running into 20 or 30, and having the smaller trees and the flowers and the plants actually on as many things as I could to give it a more natural feel. So doors, the visual representation of doors in Horizon, is something that I felt just would never work in here, would look completely out of place. So I actually built a specific island, and that was only built to hide the doors. So this is, again, it's a moment of discovery. You'd have to explore the island to find these. So they are hidden, because I thought that I wanted to protect the aesthetic more so than promote the other versions of this world. I suppose the last thing I'll talk about was the sea. So after the sky, creating a convincing sea was super important. And as we don't have animated textures, I did some tests with rotating. This is a 1 kilometer wide disc or a flattened cylinder. I did some tests with kind of rotating it, and it felt really weird and strange to get a bit of movement out of this object. I had it moving one way and the other. And then I realized that if I basically just created the water's edge at the edge of the sand, attached it to the sea, and then had the sea kind of move up, move down a little bit, move up, and then kind of do this kind of motion, I could get something that looked a little bit convincing. So that was the approach to that. We're gonna go to Questies. Imagine my excitement when, as you know, I work at Meta. I got contacted to be involved in the group who were putting together the Super Bowl initiative. We've got a great team there, and the marketing team, they've partnered with an agency who are putting together the Super Bowl advert. So towards the end of last year, I started getting some concept art pieces to get me inspired. And if you've seen the advert, that it's the journey of these old friends, and they end up in a kind of virtual recreation of the place where they used to play together. So immediately I had some great concept art reference. I had the Questy's logo, the stage area, the general theming was that it's that kind of really kind of playful kind of aliens, Pizza Planet from Toy Story. If you've seen that film, I hope you have. So immediately I had lots of things to give me a head start on building out the world. Very early on, we made the decision that one of the more important aspects of Questies was going to be occupancy. So we didn't want this to be like many of my previous worlds, 4 users or 10 users. This had to be, 18, 20 people had to experience this space. So that, in a way, that kind of dictated my approach to this world. I knew it needed to have activities, so there needed to be some kind of stage activity. There needed to be an area that was a diner, because this was the kind of arcade, Pizza Planet inspired environment. But also there needed to be some games. So this world actually started early Jan. I think it was Jan 3rd. I got started on this. And using what I'd learned from my previous worlds, I started on the Horizon plane. So again, could I create a kind of I don't want to call it metaverse-y, but that kind of that interesting kind of, slightly, cyberpunk-y, metaverse-y kind of skyline. So it feels slightly unreal. So I started there, but I had an objective of doing that as efficiently as possible. So I set myself an objective of creating the horizon line and the world in less than 10% capacity, and that came in significantly under 10%. So I knew, again, with the capacity planning, I knew I had a good chunk that I could spend in Questies. For the games themselves, again, I just laid out some principles there, or some goals, which was no instruction, familiar, carnival games in themed. So people would approach these games and they would just start playing them. They wouldn't have to learn anything. They almost knew what these games were going to do before they started. So for the games part of this, that's when the utterly delightful Sandwich, also known as Ruben, came in to help, because he's a spectacular mathematician with really, really good gameplay instincts and game design instincts. Air hockey was a huge challenge, because if Sandwich was going to use local scripting on to get the reactivity of the puck, colliding with the paddle in a responsive way, he was going to have to use local scripting. But as the puck passes to the other side of the table, this player also needs to be on local scripting. So you might have noticed a slight stutter in the center. Now this did kind of trouble us for a while, but when we were playing it or watching people playing it, even though with the ownership transfer event that happens when the puck crosses the center of the table, people were still having fun. They were smiling, they were laughing, they were getting serious, they were trying to beat each other. So this kind of made it into the final shipped version, just due to the fact that people were just having so much fun on it. Aesthetically, for the staging of all these, I did mention that a lot of this was predefined, and we had a great team over at Meta, and they were kind of feeding me with great information about how the production of the advert was going on. So I made sure that everything would fit really well, and there was a good visual relationship. But again, I had these elements, I had the atoms, aliens, spacemen, UFOs, all of this stuff. So then all I really needed to do was, with the games, the signage and the propping, I just really had to kind of just take that theming and that aesthetic and just kind of build around it. So it all felt like it worked. Ooh, the arcade sound effects. Now, I don't know if you could hear those. I absolutely love this. And this was the audio team. I was working with them. I said, I really need some kind of, that old school kind of arcade vibe. So you immediately get that nostalgic feeling. UFO attack. I mean, it was a really good candidate. Just a classic shooting gallery. I don't think you can go to a Carnival Games event, and you won't see something like this. And it fitted really well with the the kind of the UFO alien theme. So not much more to say about that one, apart from it was really important to me, and that we had anti-griefing features in this. So as soon as you put a gun in a world, people just want to take that gun and run off and try shooting people with it, but it has a proximity trigger. But also, if you can hear me, you can't fire it outside of this kind of range here. So again, it was just really important that introducing something like this into a world like this, people couldn't run off and grief with it. Okay, so the stage activity. This one did actually take some head scratching, because every musical instrument world that I've been to in Horizon, where the musical instruments are interactive, you can pick them up and you can put your hand in different places, or you can do actions or gestures or press buttons or whatever. Because of player-to-player server lag and things like this, even though they're great and I like those worlds and they're fun and people do have fun in them, I couldn't spend too long in there because the way that the audio would clash with each other, and it would kind of be mistimed and stuff. So I wanted to avoid that. So I came up with a system whereby if I step into one of these circles, then it'll activate the sound file. Now the sound file is just 20 meters, below this point. It's playing. When we entered the world, all 3 sound files for the different instruments all started playing. So I know that they're all going to be in time. So if I step it into this one, and then this stuff, it all kind of works. And then there's the role play part of this. So I can pick up the guitar, I can goof around, and goofing around is really fun. It's really fun in Horizon. People do love to kind of role play. So just helping them do that, giving them the hats from the characters, it's that helps people just feel a bit more silly, and just play around with these things. So this has been a massive hit with the younger Horizon users. I've seen, honestly, countless times where younger users are having a great time with this. Okay, last one. It's whack-a-mole. It's space slugs. The thing I realized with this, when we started testing it, people were hitting their desk or colliding with objects. So then it just had a little warning here. And then the last two activities are, there was just enough capacity to make some grabbable objects. And this is actually, I'll talk about in terms of kind of build flow. I always have that piece at the end when I'm making my worlds where I go capacity hunting, and I actually quite enjoy it. When I spend a lot of time at 100% capacity on object and sim and anim, and then it's really is just a case of, I would say this to any Horizon world builder, just standing in your world and thinking, what detail am I getting value from? In Crashsite, there's a band. It's about 70 centimeters off the floor, and it goes up for about 1 meter, and that's where I put all the detail, because that's people's kind of interaction ranges, and that's where their head is. So spending detail there rather than on the ceiling or areas that are really, really, really far away. So that's one thing I'll do. I'll look at, there's a great example. The lighting rig above the stage equipment was much more detailed than that. Had many more lights on it, structurally, but because it was so high up and it was in a less lit area, I was happy to just keep pulling objects out of that while I was trying to buy back 20 or 30 objects to create these. And lastly, AstroZap. This was actually originally Skee-Ball, but we didn't get great results from that. and I don't think Sandwich was feeling it right then. So then we talked about some other things like a pinball launcher, catapult games, and then that catapult interaction just grew into what you see here. So it really is kind of just shoot the asteroids. Partway through that process, it was suggested that I implement dynamic lighting as a way of saying, get the community excited, coming soon, we've got this feature, it's awesome. So then that became the stage area and the UFO on the kind of notional dance floor. Absolutely love that feature, and I can't wait to show you what I've got planned in the future with that dynamic light gizmo.
Huge thank you to Victor for sharing his expertise. Be sure to subscribe to Meta Horizon Worlds on YouTube to join us in part 2 for question and answers coming soon.